Hi everybody, it's meteorologist Joe Cioffi here. It's Wednesday. We're halfway through the week on this July 11th, 2 minutes after 7 o'clock Eastern Time. Hope everybody had a great day. We have a lot going on weather-wise. A few interesting things happening in parts of the country that, well, at least at this time of the year, usually you don't get too much going on. And I'm talking particularly about the Southwest. But we're going to get to that. I want to talk about the long range tonight, which I thought looked pretty interesting in terms of the overall pattern going forward. But I think we'll start front and center with the tropics, and we'll begin tonight with Hurricane Chris. And you can see it pretty well here with respect to the Atlantic satellite view. Well offshore, and top winds are just under 100 miles an hour. You can still see, by the way, a pretty well-defined eye that got cloud-filled during the day, but you can make it out distinctly in the cloud tops on the visible. And then it appears because it's on the northern edge of the Gulf Stream, so it's going over some very warm water right now. So it looks like the eye may have gotten a little better defined in the last several hours. I don't think it's going to last much longer because pretty soon it's going to be headed up into the colder waters of the North Atlantic, and it looks like it'll probably make a close pass to Newfoundland based on the Hurricane Center's forecast, which I'll bring up here. We'll take a look, and there you go. So based on the Hurricane Center's forecast, it does keep it at hurricane strength for a while longer before it brings it to a post-tropical, quote, a post-tropical storm with tropical storm force winds. And the track takes it just to the southeast of St. John's, Newfoundland, as it moves across the Atlantic. And by the way, those of you who are watching from England and Ireland and Europe, but specifically for England and Ireland, the new forecast track, and this kind of reflects what the models have been showing for the last number of days, that this system basically gets deflected more toward the northeast and passes somewhere probably closer to Iceland than it does to Scotland. It looks like the track is shifting more toward the northwest over time, which is something that the European model and the GFS also were indicating. The other thing to look at on the satellite view, and just kind of coming into the edge of the picture here, you can see it on the bottom of the screen, the cloud cover that's from Florida east across the Bahamas. You can't really see the whole view of it at this stage. I'll go to see if I can get a little tighter. Here's a tight view, a super tight view of it. And these are the remnants of Hurricane Beryl, which those remnants move over the leewards and Hispaniola and Puerto Rico, bringing some heavy rains. And now that we've got actually a fairly impressive radar presentation that I saw earlier over the Bahamas. So there's quite a bit of shower and thunderstorm activity. It seems to be persisting. We don't see too much organization here. There's no evidence of any kind of circulation. I think maybe we'll try, see if I can get the Caribbean view might give a better picture of this on a slightly wider view. And, you know, there's a lot of thunderstorms there, but you don't see any kind of turning, any kind of curvature yet. Upper air conditions remain unfavorable for now. If you look on the northern fringe of the clouds, and they're moving west to east, so that's part of the outflow from Hurricane Chris. Now, what I think will happen is, as Chris pulls away and accelerates to the northeast, those upper level winds are going to relax somewhat, and that is going to perhaps create conditions a bit more conducive for regeneration. This is what the Hurricane Center has been talking about for the last number of days. By the way, if you look out to the east here, you can see there's a giant upper low in the high levels of the atmosphere, and that is also moving westward. when you have an upper low like that sitting out in the Atlantic, it usually means that tropical storm formation is not going to happen. But let's see if that upper low keeps progressing westward and weakens for future development out in the Eastern Atlantic, or does it persist out there? Because a lot of times when we get into these El Nino type years, for example, you get these big upper lows that kind of park themselves up in the central Atlantic and create strong upper level winds and strong wind shear conditions, which is works against tropical storm development. So, you know, kind of interesting here that we've got all of this going on in the tropics as they sort of begin. You know, we're going to very slowly but surely start setting up for the more active part of hurricane season, which will be coming in short order. I think what I want to do now is, though, let's see if I got that U.S. map in here somewhere. I just want to show you what's happening down in the southwest. And yeah, let's bring up the warnings map. And you don't see it too often this time of year, but you know, virtually the southern half of Arizona, a small part of New Mexico, down into Southern California, inland. A lot of flood watches and a lot of flash flood warnings that are up. And that's because you're getting this kind of monsoonal flow here that sets up oftentimes. Usually it sets up a little bit later in the summer, but it seems to be setting up a bit early. And it's producing quite a bit of shower downpours and some thunderstorms in parts of the southwest. And you know, the threshold for flooding there is pretty low because the ground is baked like cement. And what winds up happening is the stuff just runs off, and you know, you get like 3/4 of an inch of rain, and you've got a massive flash flood situation. Here's the radar with the Storm Prediction Center's view of things, and you can see the shower and thunderstorm activity that's scattered throughout much of the southwest and southern Rockies. We do have a risk zone tonight in the upper Midwest, northern Minnesota, northwestern Wisconsin, under a slight risk of severe weather. Probably going to see that fire up a bit later on. And there's a marginal risk in southern Virginia, northeasternmost North Carolina. Otherwise, sort of a general area of thunderstorms that extends from actually from just north of me. Although we had a couple of very small echoes show up on the radar this evening, but mainly scattered across the Gulf states in typical afternoon fashion in the month of July. And looks like we're getting thunderstorm development along the west coast of Florida from just north of the Keys up to about Tampa, St. Pete. The radar seemed to be locally busy in that particular area. Now, let me come back to the models, and we're going to take a look at where things are going in the long term, because I thought this was pretty interesting today. And over the last couple of days, you know, we've been talking about this whole trough in the east, ridge in the west business. And that is coming front and center now as we continue to move through the middle part of July. And what I'm starting with here is the North America view of the jet stream toward the middle of next week. Now, bear this in mind. And I've been trying to emphasize this. It doesn't mean that it can't get hot, and it doesn't mean that it can't get hot for a day or two. I would expect that is going to happen when we're talking about weather for mainly in the eastern part of the U.S. But with the absence of any kind of ridge in the eastern part of the United States, you're going to have a real tough time with temperatures going forward. And if you've got a busy jet stream to the north, as is being indicated here on our 500 millibar jet stream forecast out for next Wednesday, you've got a trough with a fairly busy northern part of the jet stream that gets pretty far to the south. So this, as we said, will allow cold fronts to come through from time to time, maybe every 3 or 4 days or so. Notice that the ridge, by the way, is very flat. and it kind of stretches out east to west. It's not bulging north to south like we saw during that round of heat and humidity last week. It's very flat east to west. Doesn't have any strength to it really. It's just kind of elongated from coast to coast. That's what we mean by flat. It looks flat. It's just kind of laying there. Out in the Atlantic part of the ridge does push up a little bit north of 40 North right in here, but even in the Atlantic, the upper high is not all that strong, and this is allowing the jet stream pattern, to come further south than it otherwise would, and it makes for a very interesting scenario going forward in a number of ways. This is, by the way, the Europeans' view. The GFS actually has a bit of a stronger look, but I kind of wanted to show the two models. And now I'm going to go to the GFS and jump a bit forward in time. Here it is around the same time frame as the European. And I'm going to jump to 300 hours. So this is, we're talking over 12 days from now. We're talking the 24th of July. And here's a look at that point. I mean, this is actually, for this time of year, I was kind of racking my brains out trying to remember, in past summers where, we've seen something like this, and nothing really comes to mind at this point. I'll have to ask Joe Rayo because he remembers these things a lot better than I do. But we've got a fairly deep trough here, and it's been showing this for a number of runs. And notice, the jet in Canada is really kind of rolling right along. It just sending shortwave trough after shortwave trough southeastward. Now, at this point, by the way, the ridge in the west, it's no longer this sort of flat east-west ridge. It separates with that trough in the middle. So now we have a distinct upper high in the western part of the United States. And the Atlantic ridge east of 60 degrees west gets stronger too. And that allows for that trough to come down right in the middle. When I looked at, I don't really look at them that much this time of year, but I happened to glance at the teleconnections with the Eastern Pacific Oscillation going strongly negative for this time of year, and the NAO is going to be negative too, and the Pacific North America Index slightly positive. So this favors troughing in the eastern part of the United States. Now, here are a couple of things to remember about this. If this pattern persists as we go into August and September, it's going to have two very important implications. One is that it will mean a regular delivery of cool shots of Canadian air coming down. And of course, as you get deeper into the month of August and you start to go into September, those cool shots could become especially cool in some places. The other thing is, and I think this is the one that's more important, is with the trough in the east. If it's like this, if you wind up getting a trough in the east and that trough lines up near 75 degrees west, for example, okay, if you have and if there's a tropical system around, it's probably going to want to go up in this particular direction. All right, if you wind up, and I'll make it on a cleaner map because I think it'll show up better. And let me make sure you guys are seeing this, which you are. So, let's say again, so let's say that the mean position of the upper trough is right along the coast, like this. That would probably mean that any tropical systems will want to go up and out in the open waters of the Atlantic. But with the persistent trough in the east, what you have to be careful of is that there might be some variation where the ridge in the west maybe is a little further west, so that it builds up the west coast, and then the trough in the east winds up being, instead of along the east coast, perhaps just inland of the east coast, or even back to 85 degrees or 90 degrees, in which case if you wind up with a tropical system, you're going to wind up with something that's going to want to come closer. So the fact that the trough is in the eastern part of the United States is very important. And also the other thing I would say is, just from observation, from what we've seen in this limited way of the season, the 3 storms we've had so far, the Alberto going into the eastern Gulf of Mexico, Chris forming off the southeast coast and now rushing its way to the northeast, and Beryl, whose remnants seem to have now found their way in the northern Bahamas, and will probably, those remnants will take a similar track with what we have in the east in terms of the jet stream, that perhaps we might be having a season this year where instead of seeing these storms in the Caribbean and in the Gulf of Mexico, we may see more of them on the Atlantic side. So that's something to think about going forward. I'm not making any kind of big prediction here by any means, but I'm just merely suggesting that given what's going on and given the structure of the upper air at this point, you have to ask yourself whether that is that perhaps the hurricane season this year is going to be more in the subtropics and more on the Atlantic side than in the deep tropics and in the Caribbean Gulf of Mexico side like it was last year. So when we go out even further on the GFS, you can see that trough in the east kind of hangs, and this is what I'm talking about when you have here on this run, and we know it's going to change, but here on this run, you do have the trough axis eventually pulling back more toward 85, between 85 and 90 degrees west, so that kind of opens a door here into the southeast. If there's a storm out there, you could have all of this going on, folks. You could have a perfect, you could have a setup in the upper air that would scream storm up the East Coast, but if there's no storm there, then there's nothing to worry about. So I just want to, put that out there. Something we're going to be, we're certainly going to be paying close attention as we get into August and September to see if this idea of this trough in the east is something that's going to hang on for the rest of the summer and into the early fall, or you know what? It's always possible that you could wind up with the ridge in the east coming back, and the trough in the east this whole pattern plays itself out, and suddenly you get some kind of large-scale change in the upper air pattern, and we've got something different. It's one of the fun things about the world of weather, folks. Sometimes you think you have it all figured out, and then something comes along and says, no, we're going to do something different. So let's look at the eastern part of the United States now, and we'll see what represents Chris way out in the Atlantic. The green patches representing the convection from Beryl, and it does occasionally kind of close off a little surface low. It's not really doing very much with this. As far as the weather is concerned, for my area, from eastern Pennsylvania to southern New England, including New York, New Jersey, Hudson Valley, Long Island, Connecticut, you want to extend it down to Delaware, Maryland, South Central PA. We're going to be reasonably dry the next 2 days, and then over the weekend we will turn gradually warmer and more humid. The next cold front doesn't look to pass until maybe on Tuesday evening or Tuesday night. Here we have a front coming through with that next trough that I showed you on the upper air, and that'll bring in a change in air mass for the middle of next week. And then as we move beyond that, here comes another front for next weekend, and another high comes down, and then probably another front behind that. So it's a fairly active pattern. You're certainly not going to be able to get 7 or 8 days of 90-degree plus heat in the Northeast with a pattern like this. You could certainly get the odd day. We were just in the low to mid 90s yesterday in a lot of places. But that was really like it's sort of that one hot day stood out among the cooler, drier days that we had over the weekend. And then today it was about 8 to 10 degrees lower. And tomorrow will be probably a few degrees lower than that. So it shows you where where things are at pattern-wise here. Just want to bring up the Weather Prediction Center's view of rainfall over the next week, because it's getting very dry in my area. We've had a few days with thunderstorms that have produced some locally heavy rains and have created locally wet moisture content in some areas, and particularly when you get down through the Mid-Atlantic states, that continues to be the case. But there are also a lot of areas here that have not gotten anything, and we're seeing some patches where it's getting abnormally dry. So over the next 7 days, rainfall amounts in the Northeast really don't look all that impressive. Generally under 1.5 inches, and in a lot of areas under an inch. We do have perhaps a bit more rainfall of size across the Gulf states and in the lower Tennessee Valley and parts of the Southeast, back over into Louisiana. But notice it dries out considerably once you get into Southeast Texas and beyond. And we're getting some big rains in the Southwest, where we're looking at 2-inch plus 3-inch amounts or more in a good chunk of Arizona, New Mexico, on up through Colorado, and then a swath through the Central Plains and into the upper Midwest of some sizable rainfall amounts. And all of this is going to be convectively driven, let's say. So pretty interesting here. Mid-July, we're going into now, at least climatologically, we are going into the time of year where we're going to see our temperature peaks statistically. The last couple of weeks of July and the first 5 or 6 days of August, and then down we go. We start to that descent begins, and then that descent accelerates as you go into September, October. And I think the other, the big question, again, going back to what I was talking about before, the big question in my mind is going to be, are we going to see, there's been this tendency for the ridge in the east to pop up in the late summer and last into at least the first 3 or 4 weeks of the fall season. That happened last year. I think it might even have happened the year before. Perhaps you can maybe this year it's going to be different. Maybe this year we're going to see cooler weather coming down when it's supposed to. Nick Cortese, who's forever looking for hot weather, thanks for hitting Super Chat. I'm telling you, you're not going to get these long stretches of hot weather, and yes, bone dry conditions here where we are for Long Island, New York City, and into parts of southern New England. Israel, you want to see the teleconnections? All right, hang on a second. Let's see if we can. I'll bring that up. So. Okay, so this is how it looks like on the map. It's a little big. Let me shrink it down. I'm going to bring the map up on the screen in 1 second. So just patience, folks. Okay, so let's bring the window capture back up. Open that up to the top. Okay, so here are your teleconnections. If you Google it's esrl.noaa.gov, but just Google teleconnections ESRL, and you'll get the site. So the upper left is the Pacific North America Index, or PNA, and you can see how July 19th or so it goes slightly positive. The NAO is negative now, goes a little bit positive over the weekend, and then it goes negative again through much of next week, and then kind of hovers around the neutral zone. It's the EPO that was really impressive in terms of how far negative it is for this time of year anyway. This is pretty impressive. From July 17th or so, right, it starts to go strongly negative right into July 25th, 26th. So this is the point where the models really start to show that trough in the east strengthening. And the EPO is probably driving it. In the wintertime, the negative EPO usually means cold weather in the eastern part of the United States. You've got to see what the other indices are doing, but a negative EPO. I actually, from the standpoint, if you're a winter weather lover, I tend to think that you really want a negative EPO even more so than the negative NAO. Okay, so the blocking is, when you have it, it's okay, but it doesn't happen that often. The negative EPO is more important. Hello from Ellicott City with Jeff there. Nice to see you. And hopefully no more floods in your future there. You've had enough with the one from a couple of months ago. Nice day for T-Bear. You certainly could get used to this. If the European ensembles are correct, some nice looking troughs in here for early August. That's correct. And the GFS ensembles go along with it. A lot of the models are fairly in sync in the long range, so it lends confidence to the view. How much is that Saharan dust limiting daily thunderstorms over the islands of the Caribbean? Looks quiet. There's a lot of Saharan dust out there, Timothy. We saw it yesterday on the satellite. If you go to the GOES 16 satellite, the color ones, excuse me, you can see the dust is fairly extensive across the tropical Atlantic and in the lower tropics, even extending into the Caribbean, and that is an inhibitor of development. Israel is going to Israel August 8th. I can't tell you what the weather is like there. I know that it's hot there and it's dry. I had a friend of mine was just there, and she just got back from Israel, and so the weather was great. Very warm, but bone dry. How much accuracy in out 12 days? Well, you try to look for consistency, and models seem to be doing this every day. So I think from the general sense, you can speak to the fact that they'll be troughing in the east. Now, in terms of what that means for specific weather conditions, you really can't do that this far out. But I think we can generally say what I said earlier, which is, if the trough in the east is there, then you're going to see cold fronts coming through every 3 or 4 days, and that will keep weather systems moving along. Can't get hot for too long. Maybe it gets hot for a day or two and humid for a day or two, but that would be the extent of it. The dates for that run, okay, for the maps that I showed you, the one for next week is next Wednesday, and then the one after that is for the following Tuesday. So whatever next Wednesday is the 18th, and the other one was for the 24th. Okay. Yes, David Schwartz, water your garden and water it continuously. And you're right, Nick. I haven't seen any. I think I've seen one thunderstorm, and only because I happened to not be on Long Island when it happened this year. And I've probably seen all of maybe 2 or 3 thunderstorms in the last 3 years. I have spoken about the fact that talking to one of my friends at the Weather Service, because we've been having conversations about this whole lack of thunderstorm activity that's been going on in general in the New York area. Lack of thunderstorms doesn't mean no thunderstorms. Of course, we had that huge outbreak of severe weather 2 months ago in mid-May, and there have been days where we've seen numerous thunderstorms develop in some places. But when you scale it out over the entire spring and summer, the activity is subnormal, and there seems to be an idea of a 5-year cycle, a very rough 5-year cycle, and that we may be at the very bottom of that cycle or coming off the bottom now, so that over the next 5 years we should start to see a general increase in shower or thunderstorm activity. My gateway, do we think we get one more named storm in July or beginning of August? Well, I have to tell you, with 3 named storms and 2 hurricanes already in the month of July, where we are on the calendar, which is July 11th, the hurricane season has gotten off to a fairly active start. Usually, I don't want to I know I'm going to misquote this, but usually you don't get your second hurricane on the map until sometime later in August. So we're well ahead of that as far as the activity is concerned. But again, the most important thing is, are these storms hitting land? Alberto came on as a tropical storm in May. That went into the Florida Panhandle. But but these two systems have had, Chris is not going to have any land impact on the United States, but it will graze Newfoundland. And Beryl, well, it fell apart before it got to the leewards, and now we're dealing with remnants. William Huber, your pool is losing 1/4 of an inch of water every day. You know, I saw you post that yesterday just as I was wrapping up the live stream, and I happened to look at mine, and yeah, I'm kind of same with me, losing water through evaporation every day, which is normal. But I think the fact that we've had a number of these days where the dew points have been very low, and the very, very strong sun has, I think, accelerated the process a little bit. So I actually have to throw some water in my pool because I have to vacuum it, and I got to get the water level a little higher because I like to vacuum the stuff. You know, when I vacuum it, I got to vacuum. I want to get the dirt out of the pool. I don't want to run it through the filter, so we move it out. Can the teleconnection send storm signals for tropical systems similar to storm signals in the wintertime? Well, Ryan, the thing is, I think there's more variability. You can have, and I've seen it many, many times. You can have the pattern set up that the teleconnections will tell you that there'll be a trough in the east and a ridge in the west, and then you look at what's going on in the tropics, and then there are other things going on in the tropics, and there are no tropical storms or hurricanes running around at the time that the trough is there. So I think there's they're separate things, because in the wintertime when the teleconnections are there, you usually see some sort of extra tropical storm development somewhere as a result. This time of year the pressure patterns are a lot weaker. You get sometimes what might be a 990 millibar low in the wintertime might wind up being a 10-12 low and a bit of a wave that rolls on a front. So I think what you have to look at is, okay, the teleconnections are telling you trough in the east, and you look at that separately from the activity in the tropics. Now, one of the things I guess I got to look at a bit deeper here, because when you don't pay attention to these things on a regular basis, it's new stuff for you, and I'm sure there are people that look at the teleconnections every day and can tell you that the setup may be more favorable for tropical storm development in a given place, given certain teleconnections. But I can't speak to that because I don't know that much about its relationship with regards to tropical storm development. Michael Beryl, I noticed the same thing. Also, hasn't been that many thunderstorms at all this summer. Do you think the lack of instability because we haven't had the right conditions for them? Well, I mean, the setups have been at moderate at best, and I've always had a rule that whatever trend, going back to the whole idea is the trend is your friend. There are times, a lot of the time recently, when models early on are showing you what could be a big thunderstorm event, and as soon as we get into the short range, the stuff looks less and less impressive and winds up falling apart. So I think you have to look at it with that sort of skepticism when you do see an active situation being pointed to in the longer range. However, the opposite is true. When you have years where things are very, very active, usually it happens the other way. You're looking at the long range, something doesn't look active, but as you get closer and closer to the short range in real time, it suddenly starts looking much more impressive. So I just think the overall, we're kind of stuck in this this cyclical downtrend when it comes to thunderstorm activity over us. And if the 5-year cycle idea is correct, then we're going to start to see an increase in thunderstorm activity, going forward. We'll see. And yeah, a lot of Nick makes a good point here. You've got at least for the coastal areas, you've had a lot of dry air masses coming down. Humidity's been very low. But even when we've had the tropical air like we had last week, the thunderstorm activity actually peaked early in the week and decreased, even though the humidity level stayed high all week long. And the marine influence, of course, plays a big role for the coastal areas. Johnny Quest, you start work on the arc yet? Yeah, you know, poor Johnny Quest, where he is in the Blue Ridge, where, you know, they've gotten almost a year's worth of rain in the last 3 months. If the pattern starts to come back where they start getting more rain, I don't think he's gonna be happy. My Getaway says last 3 times there were 2 hurricanes in July. 2008, 2005. 2005 is no surprise. That was the big year of activity. And 2003. Yeah, it doesn't happen too often. I can remember a whole lot of hurricane seasons, by the way, where we've gone through June and July without a single storm. Stephen White, is the fall going to be cool? Well, let's see if that trough in the east is something that carries through the month of August into September, or are we going to flip back into a ridge in the east? That's the big question. And as long as you've got troughing in the east, it's going to keep things from getting too hot for too long. Specifically to the month of August, Nick, you always keep asking me long-range questions, okay? I can't answer that. I don't know. I can look at the next 2 weeks and tell you. After that, it's anybody's guess. So, I can't tell you what the month of, well, it could start out cool and then wind up being hot toward the second half. And, August certainly is a month where you could see temperatures well up into the 90s. Even into the early part of September it's happened. But I can't tell you, okay? I don't know. Ryan, there's a weak upper level steering for a tropical system as the track becomes so unpredictable the system goes wherever it pleases. Well, where there's no steering currents, even, a slight push in one direction or another, then you start to look at the really small things in the atmosphere that might move something along. Maybe a very small upper low, or, just like a little ripple in the flow someplace could wind up steering something in one direction or another. Nick, I don't know, okay? I'm not keeping anything secret or keeping everybody in suspense. I don't know. Okay, Johnny Quest, I saw on the aviation weather page we had storms above 50. You had cloud tops that high. I'm not at all surprised. This is the time of year certainly you can get tops up over 50,000 feet. Sometimes you can go even higher than that. The tropopause is way up in the atmosphere. Interesting how last summer was up in gorgeous White Mountain in Lincoln, New Hampshire. There were very strong storms very often late at night, and even nights that got into the 40s. Yeah, one place is famine, is another place's feast, and yeah, you probably were seeing what's happening this year with the with the weather pattern the way it's been, where poor Johnny Quest is getting hit with got hit with all that rain, where the frontal boundary set up just north of southernmost Virginia. And think about it, it's not a whole lot of distance. If the frontal boundary had set up maybe in northern Maryland off to Delaware, that eastern Pennsylvania to southern New England would have been sitting in all that rain. But that was not the case. And I do remember 2005 specifically with Hurricane Katrina, amazing storm surge with that, and that was an absolutely incredible year. It was absolutely nonstop in terms of tropical systems. And you had Hurricane Elena that year that was a Category 5 in the month of July, and it was the first Category 5 ever observed in the month of July. So that was a really remarkable year in terms of activity. My Getaway, will Chris impact Europe in any way? With it getting deflected further to the north and west, I guess it lends to the possibility that the rain from it is going to wind up missing. I'm going to do this off screen really fast. There are some showers that are going to come through, but nothing impressive between now and Sunday. Yeah, I mean, it looks like it would be a complete miss, and the weather pattern looks fairly dry. I mean, there are some showers coming in from time to time every couple of days, but the absence of that system tracking further south is probably a bigger game changer for England and Ireland and for northwestern Europe in terms of rainfall, because it basically cuts it all off, since it's all going up more toward Iceland and Greenland than anything else. All right, so I think that's it, folks. I'm going to leave it at that. Thanks, everybody, for being here. The Joe and Joe Weather Show with Joe Rayo, Facebook tonight at 9:15, and you can find that on my Facebook page, Meteorologist Joe Cioffi. And if you go to meteorologistjoecioffi.com, I wrote up a piece today about the long range specifically, so you can read a bit deeper into what is going on. And Cullen says progressive frontal boundaries in mountains find what little instability that's there. That's correct. Good point. Okay, so it's a Joe and Joe show tonight at 9:15. Websites, you can read the latest post on the long range. And what else? Trying to think if there's anything exciting going forward. No, there isn't. So just a reminder, folks, there's an Amazon link on the chat on this live stream and on the video. In the video library, if you're watching this on a replay later. We're a participant in the Amazon Services LLC Associates program, which is an affiliate advertising program designed to provide a means for this channel to earn fees by linking to Amazon.com and affiliated sites. So in other words, if you shop on Amazon and you go through my link and you buy something, you get your stuff at Amazon's great prices, and Amazon throws me back some coin so I can get myself a cigar and relax on the drive home. Thank you very much for those of you who have used it. Thank you, Dick, for hitting Super Chat tonight. And we will see you either later or tomorrow.